On July 16, 1945, in a desolate patch of New Mexico desert known as the Jornada del Muerto, the journey of the dead man, the world left the age of biology and entered the age of physics. At 5:29 a.m., the bright light of 1,000 suns flooded the valley. The heat was so intense, it turned sand into glass. And standing 10 miles away, a thin man with piercing blue eyes whispered a line from an ancient Hindu scripture. "Now I am become death," he said, "the destroyer of worlds." His name was J. Robert Oppenheimer, and in that moment, he became the most famous and the most tragic scientist in human history. To understand how a man could give humanity the power to extinguish itself, we have to start at the beginning. Julius Robert Oppenheimer was born in New York City in 1904 to wealthy German Jewish immigrants. He grew up in a world of art, culture, and immense privilege, an apartment filled with Van Goghs. But young Robert was isolated. He was often bullied, and he retreated into a world of minerals, poetry, and languages. He graduated Harvard in just 3 years, summa cum laude, but he was restless. He traveled to Europe to study the new, mind-bending world of quantum physics. At Cambridge, he was miserable. He once left a poisoned apple on his tutor's desk. But at Göttingen University in Germany, he blossomed. He didn't just learn physics, he radiated it. Friends noted that he could read a paper and instantly see the flaws, the possibilities, the poetry in the math. By the time he returned to America, he was teaching at UC Berkeley and Caltech, splitting his time between the two. He was known as a brilliant, sometimes arrogant, lecturer who could make the most complex theories seem simple. But in the 1930s, the world changed. The rise of fascism in Europe sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Oppenheimer, despite his detachment from politics, began to pay attention. Many of his friends and colleagues were Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi Germany. The problem was terrifyingly simple. In 1938, German scientists had discovered nuclear fission. If Hitler got the bomb first, the war was over. In August 1939, Albert Einstein signed a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, warning that the United States was in a race against time, a race against the Nazis. The result was the Manhattan Project, a top-secret, multi-billion-dollar effort to build an atomic bomb before Germany could. But they needed someone to lead the science. They needed a laboratory director. The military man in charge was General Leslie Groves. He was a builder, the guy who had just constructed the Pentagon. He was huge, blunt, and practical. Oppenheimer was the opposite, ethereal, philosophical, and a chain smoker who weighed barely 115 pounds. Groves was interviewing potential scientific directors. Most were Nobel laureates. Oppenheimer had never won a Nobel Prize. But Groves saw something no one else did. Oppenheimer understood everything. He could talk theory with the physicists and logistics with the engineers. He had a strange charisma that made people want to work for him. Groves ignored the red flags, like the fact that Oppenheimer had friends in communist circles, and made a decision that would change history. On a train in October 1942, he told Oppenheimer, "You're the man I want." Together, they chose a remote location, a boys' school on a mesa in New Mexico called Los Alamos. Los Alamos was a bizarre city. It didn't exist on any map. Mail came to a P.O. box in Santa Fe. Families lived in crude barracks behind barbed wire. But inside the wire were the greatest minds of the 20th century: Enrico Fermi, Hans Bethe, Richard Feynman. Oppenheimer created an atmosphere of total intellectual urgency. He held seminars at midnight. He knew every detail of every experiment. He motivated geniuses who didn't like being told what to do. But two separate problems emerged. The first was the bomb itself. They had to figure out how to make a plutonium bomb implode evenly. The second was inside Oppenheimer's head. He was being watched. Security officers suspected him of being a spy because of his past left-wing associations. During the war, his security officer had a wiretap placed in his office. Oppenheimer knew he was being followed, but he kept working. He drove himself to exhaustion, smoking 4 packs of Chesterfield a day, telling his brother, "I need this thing to work. If it doesn't work, the Nazis will win." By the summer of 1945, Germany had surrendered. The original reason for the bomb was gone, but the project pressed on. Japan was still fighting. On July 16th, the team assembled at the Trinity Test site. The bomb, nicknamed the Gadget, was hoisted to the top of a 100-foot steel tower. A thunderstorm rolled in. The scientists worried the bomb might blow up in the storm or fail to go off at all. Oppenheimer lay on the ground of the control bunker, gripping a post to steady himself. At 5:29 a.m., the bomb detonated. The desert lit up brighter than day. A ball of fire rose into the sky, turning purple and green. The heat was so intense, it was felt 10 miles away. As the mushroom cloud climbed to 40,000 feet, Oppenheimer watched in silence. A single line of poetry ran through his head from the Bhagavad Gita, a text he had read in Sanskrit. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." His brother Frank later said, "We all said it worked." But Robert just stood there, looking relieved and terrified. 3 weeks later, on August 6, 1945, a uranium bomb called Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, a plutonium bomb called Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki. Between 129,000 and 226,000 people were killed, mostly civilians. The world had never seen anything like it. At Los Alamos, the mood shifted from triumph to horror. When the news came over the loudspeaker, the scientists cheered. But within days, a gloom settled over the lab. Oppenheimer was seen walking the halls with a stony look on his face. A few weeks later, he met with President Harry Truman at the White House. Oppenheimer, wringing his hands, muttered, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman was furious. He later told his staff, "I don't want to see that son of a bitch in this office ever again. He's a crybaby scientist." After the war, Oppenheimer was the most famous scientist on Earth. He became the director of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. He advised the new Atomic Energy Commission, and he saw the future, and he was terrified by it. The Soviet Union tested its own bomb in 1949, years earlier than expected. President Truman ordered the development of the next weapon, the hydrogen bomb, 1,000 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. Oppenheimer opposed it. He argued that such a weapon had no military purpose except genocide. He argued for international control of atomic energy, for sharing information with the Russians to prevent an arms race. But this was the Cold War. To argue against the H-bomb was seen as un-American. Oppenheimer's enemies, particularly Edward Teller, the father of the H-bomb, saw their chance to destroy him. Oppenheimer retreated to Princeton and to his home in the Virgin Islands. He was stripped of his power, but not his intellect. He continued to lecture on science and ethics. In 1963, as a gesture of political rehabilitation, President Lyndon Johnson awarded him the Enrico Fermi Award. It was a bittersweet moment. Johnson pinned the medal on him without saying a word. Oppenheimer later said, "I think it's a pathetic scene." He died of throat cancer in 1967, still smoking those Chesterfields. But his story doesn't end there. Today, there are roughly 13,000 nuclear weapons in the world. They're far more powerful than the bombs that destroyed Hiroshima. We have created a world where a single mistake, a glitch in a computer, a moment of panic in a bunker, could end civilization. Oppenheimer saw this coming. In a 1950s television interview with Edward R. Murrow, he was asked if there was any defense against atomic weapons. He simply shook his head and said, "No." Oppenheimer is often called the father of the atomic bomb, but he preferred to think of himself as a student of history. In that same interview, he reflected on the state of the world. He didn't offer easy answers. He just looked into the camera and spoke the truth. In some sort of crude sense, which no vulgarity, no humor, no overstatement can quite extinguish, the physicists have known sin, and this is a knowledge which they cannot lose. He didn't just give us the power to destroy ourselves. He gave us the responsibility to choose not to. Whether we can live up to that responsibility is still the defining question of our age. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the man who gave us the power to destroy ourselves, and the man who warned us never to use it.